A child is the very breath, the heartbeat of their parents. For Hollywood stars, that love burns brighter than any spotlight. And for that very reason, the pain when their child is born with a disability or has to battle illness tears the heart even more. Some have walked away from careers at their peak to keep vigil by a hospital bed. Some have signed surgery papers with trembling hands, knowing it could be the last chance or the final goodbye forever. And some, for the rest of their lives, would never again hear the beloved words, Dad or Mom. Get your tissues ready because the stories ahead will bring tears to your eyes. Let's begin right now. Number 1. Sylvester Stallone. When the invincible hero had to kneel before his son's illness in 1979, Los Angeles shone under the lights of glory. Rocky had just catapulted Sylvester Stallone to the pinnacle of Hollywood, with the press hailing him as the new icon of the era. But amid the cheers, the moment that made Stallone's heart swell with pride wasn't on screen. It was the moment he stepped out of Cedars-Sinai Hospital, cradling his newborn son, Ciro, in his arms. His face then was radiant, like a fighter who had just won the greatest victory of his life, the victory of a father holding his flesh and blood for the first time. In those early years, Sarjo's life unfolded in the boundless love of his parents. His hair was as soft as silk, his deep eyes a mirror of his father's, his rare smiles as warm as the morning sun. Stallone often told friends that just opening the door and seeing his son looking at him could erase all the stress and exhaustion from the film set as if they had never existed. Then the first cracks began to appear in their picture of happiness. Sergio rarely responded. When called, often withdrew into a corner, patiently lining up toys in perfect rows, avoiding sudden hugs. Sasha Jack, his wife, initially thought he was just reserved. But the afternoons they spent together calling his name dozens of times, only to be met with heavy silence, planted a seed of fear in their hearts. In 1982, at UCLA Medical Center, the doctor delivered the diagnosis into an air thick with tension, severe congenital autism. The sound of the pen scratching the paper echoed ominously in the silent room. Stallone lowered his head, eyes fixed on his shoes as if the whole world had just collapsed before him. Years later, in an interview with People, he said, "I've been knocked down hundreds of times on screen, but no blow ever hurt as much as that moment." From that instant, the on-screen Rambo stepped into a battle with no applause, no visible opponent to defeat. He scaled back his filming schedule, pouring all his time, energy, and money into therapy for his son. Every speech exercise, every hour of physical therapy, every new method, no matter how unproven, he embraced them as if each fragile chance was the only lifeline. The smallest progress from Sergio became a priceless treasure. One day, after months of silence, he suddenly called out, "Dad." Stallone burst into tears right there in the therapy room, oblivious to the stares around him. A gentle touch from his son's hand was something he would remember for life, yet between these moments came quiet stabs of pain. Many times he stood at a distance, watching his son gaze sadly toward other children, playing the sense of helplessness tightening around his chest. Friends recalled a time when Stallone left the therapy center, with shoulders weighed down, his face lowered, as if carrying an overcast sky. Yet when walking past the photographers, he instantly put on a smile, as if he had just left a successful press conference. Sasha once whispered that Stallone hid his pain deep inside because he knew that once it escaped, he would never be able to contain it again. Over 40 years have passed, and Sergio still lives with the family, needing special care every day. This battle has never had an ending, and Stallone has never stepped away from the front lines. His love is not loud, not scripted, not backed by a triumphant score, but enduring, unyielding, and stronger than any hero he has ever played on screen. Somewhere else, another legendary actress, Elizabeth Taylor, had also spent long nights by her child's hospital bed, praying to take on each pain in their place. Number 2. John Travolta. The seizure that took away his 16-year-old son, John Travolta. A face etched deep into the memories of millions of movie lovers with those mesmerizing dance moves in Saturday Night Fever. The charm of Grease and the triumphant comeback in Pulp Fiction. On the silver screen, he was the embodiment of a lure of dazzling victories. But behind those bright lights, there was a chapter in his life that, whenever mentioned, made his heart ache as if a wound had just been torn open. In 1992, in Los Angeles, Travolta let out his first cry. It was the moment John and his wife, actress Kelly Preston, had been waiting for all those years, appearing on Good Morning America. John once said that when he wrapped his arms tightly around his newborn son, he could feel clearly that from that moment on, his life would revolve around a single mission: to protect his son from every harm. The early days of Jet's life were overshadowed by a cruel fate. At just 2 years old, doctors at Cedars-Sinai diagnosed him with Kawasaki disease, a rare condition that could directly attack the heart and other vital organs. Gradually, signs of autism began to appear, accompanied by severe seizures that kept the whole family on constant high alert. Their home in Ocala, Florida was transformed by John and Kelly into a complete therapy space, a physical therapy room, a play area designed with absolute safety, and a team of nurses on duty around the clock. Kelly once choked up on the Oprah Winfrey Show, saying that just seeing Jet laugh would make all her worries disappear. Amid the tense days, there were still peaceful moments intertwined. Jet driving a golf cart with his father under the golden afternoon light, sitting for hours with his mother coloring a picture, or enjoying the sun and breeze together on the beaches of the Bahamas. Yet that peace was as fragile as morning mist. On the morning of January 2nd, 2009, while the family was vacationing at Old Bahama Bay, the sea breeze was gentle and the early sunlight was golden. Jet said he wanted to go to the bathroom. Just minutes later, a heavy sound rang out, piercing and chilling. When John and the hotel staff rushed in, the scene before him ripped the breath from his chest. Jet lay motionless on the tiled floor, his head having struck the bathtub hard. This seizure was too violent, sweeping him away like an unstoppable storm. Kelly collapsed to her knees, her voice calling for her son, shattering the air. John clutched his son's gradually cooling body tightly to his chest, shaking him desperately. "Jet, can you hear me? Open your eyes, please." Everything sank into a merciless silence. Jet was taken to Rand Memorial Hospital, but the doctor's announcement closed every door of hope. 16 years of life ended on what had seemed like a peaceful morning. The news flooded CNN, People, ABC News, but no headline could capture the depth of that pain. Months later, John and Kelly returned to the public eye. In a conversation with Barbara Walters, his tears wouldn't stop his voice breaking as he said that since Jet left, a part of his soul had vanished. He would trade every award, every role just to hold his son one more time. That emptiness remains forever carved deep into his heart, reminding the world that even at the peak of fame, the loss of a child is the greatest tragedy a human being can endure. And John Travolta is not the only one bearing such a wound. Another Hollywood legend, Sylvester Stallone, also had to face the harsh reality when his son was diagnosed with severe autism, forcing him to step away from the spotlight to walk alongside his child on a challenging journey. Number 3, Robert Redford, 2 short months to hold his child in his arms. Before the world called Robert Redford a Hollywood legend, he was just a 23-year-old newlywed living with his wife Lola Van Vagenen in a small New York apartment. They didn't have much money, but they had love and the eager anticipation of their first child, the brightest hope for the future that lay ahead. On summer evenings in 1959, Robert sat by the window, carefully building a wooden cradle for his baby. He chose white paint, sanding every corner, every edge, afraid those little hands might get scratched. Each time he passed by, he would stop imagining a baby boy lying still, stirring slightly in his sleep as the morning sun kissed his tiny red face through the window. In September, Scott Anthony Redford let out his first cry. Robert remembered vividly the moment his son's tiny hand gripped his finger, a weak grasp, yet strong enough to make him tremble. In that moment he silently promised, "I will protect you no matter what happens." But fate chose a cruel way to test that vow. Just weeks later, Scott began showing strange signs. The baby cried in short bursts, breathed rapidly, his eyes shut for hours as if avoiding the light and the world outside. The doctor said it might just be a cold, but Lola felt a chilling unease take hold of her heart. On November 17th, New York was gripped by a biting cold. Robert was at an audition when the phone rang. On the other end, Lola's voice was torn and breaking apart. "Robert, he's not breathing. They're trying." He didn't remember how he left the set, only that when he arrived at the hospital, the emergency room reeked of antiseptic under the harsh white lights. The doctor came out slowly, shaking his head so slowly and heavily it felt like the closing of an entire world. Scott was gone. The cause: sudden infant death syndrome, an invisible enemy that medicine at the time could barely fight. Robert held his son's body already cold. He pressed his cheek to his boy's, as if trying to pass his own warmth and breath into him, clinging to even the faintest hope of life. But it was too late. 2 months, that was all the time Scott had on this earth. 2 months too short for a child to know the voice of his father, but long enough to make a man into a father, only to take away what was most precious. Years later, at the height of his Hollywood fame, Robert still mentioned Scott in interviews. In The Guardian, he once said, "There are losses time will never heal. You just learn to live with them." Like a missing part of your body that still always hurts. Outwardly, Robert Redford was the face of strength of defiant characters. But deep down, he was still the father who once sat for hours in a dark room, holding a tiny blanket, still scented with his son's milk, silent, until dawn blurred in his eyes. Number 4. Elizabeth Taylor. I would trade every award, every role, if only it could take away your pain. In 1961, when the world was still spellbound by the beauty of Cleopatra and her legendary violet eyes, Elizabeth Taylor shocked the European press. Not because of a new role, nor a scandalous romance, but because of an image of her inside an orphanage in Munich, Germany, holding in her arms a tiny baby girl wrapped in a cream-colored blanket. The baby's name was Maria Burton, just a few months old. From the very first moment the doctor had placed on Elizabeth's shoulders a cold verdict: Maria was born with congenital hip dysplasia. Without early and continuous surgery, those little legs would never move. Normally, she would live her life disabled. Eddie Pfizer, Elizabeth's husband at the time, froze for a moment, but she only tightened her embrace, letting her eyes sink deep into the child's gaze like a silent promise. Later, she told Life, "At that moment, I didn't think about the illness. I only saw a pair of eyes desperately searching for safe arms, and I knew I had to be those arms." On the flight back to Los Angeles, Elizabeth did not sleep for a single moment. Every soft whimper from her daughter made her bend down to kiss her forehead, whispering lullabies between sobs. Passengers on that flight never forgot the sight of a movie star clutching her child to her chest, as if loosening her hold for even a second would make the entire world around her collapse. But Elizabeth's path as a mother was far from lined with roses. As soon as Maria began to walk, waves of hip pain struck, causing the little girl to collapse to the floor many times. Doctors at Cedars-Sinai advised multiple surgeries. Once, while filming Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Elizabeth received news that Maria needed immediate surgery. She left the set at once, still in costume, rushing to the car with only one thought burning in her mind: I have to be with my child right now. The press often saw Elizabeth leaving film sets in a halo of glamour, but few witnessed her sitting for hours on a cold plastic chair outside the operating room. Her hands clenched until they turned white. Her eyes fixed on the red sign that read, "Operation in Progress." On another occasion, after a surgery that lasted more than 4 hours, Elizabeth walked into the recovery room. Maria lay still, her face pale tubes and IV lines all over her. Elizabeth gently lifted her daughter's tiny hand to her cheek, her voice trembling as if making a vow. "If I had to trade every award, every role, even my career, I would, as long as it means you won't hurt anymore, my Maria." In the years that followed, Maria learned to walk again slowly with a limp. But whenever she saw her daughter smile as she walked past the garden in front of their house, Elizabeth knew she had won the most important Oscar of her life. Number 5. Jean Tierney. The pain and torment of a mother. In the 1940s, Jean Tierney was celebrated in Hollywood as a screen goddess with eyes as deep as an autumn lake, a face so delicate it seemed time itself dared not touch it, and a smile gentle enough to shatter any heart's defenses. But behind the glamour, she lived with a wound she once admitted was a life sentence, and I will never be pardoned. In 1943, at the peak of her career, Gan had just married the brilliant fashion designer Oleg Cassini. Their happiness was complete when she discovered she was pregnant with their first child. She continued to attend charity events, believing she was doing the right thing, that every handshake, every smile offered comfort to soldiers far from home during World War II. One evening at the Hollywood Canteen, a long line of fans waited for her autograph. Among them was a young woman with a radiant smile, but an unsettling look in her eyes. When her turn came, she suddenly hugged Jean and almost boastfully said, "I escaped from the German measles quarantine just to meet you." Jean smiled and hugged her back, not knowing that moment had planted in her body a disease that would haunt her forever. Weeks later, she developed a fever and a red rash, classic signs of rubella. The doctor warned of high risk to the baby, though he left a small glimmer of hope. Jean cradled her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "We'll get through this together, my love." On October 15, 1943, baby girl Daria Cassini let out a faint cry. But only hours later, the doctor came in with heavy eyes, delivering a diagnosis like a knife. Daria was born deaf, partially blind, and with severe intellectual disabilities. In her memoir, Jean wrote, "I couldn't breathe when I heard it. Everything blurred around me. It felt like I had locked the door to my child's life with my own hands. From that moment, every day was a battle with herself. She replayed every detail of that fateful night. The dim yellow lights, music drifting from the dance hall, the girl's face, the hug, and the words that unknowingly became her child's life sentence. During sleepless nights, she tortured herself. If only I had stepped back, if only I had refused, my child could have seen the sky, heard the birds." Daria grew up moving between the best doctors in New York and special care centers in California, but no miracle ever came. Eventually, Jean made the heartbreaking decision to place her daughter in long-term care. She called it the second knife in her life. Every visit, she held Daria for as long as possible, telling her about the deep blue of the ocean, the scent of jasmine at night, or the crimson sunset over the Beverly Hills. Daria couldn't hear, nor could she fully see, but Jean still spoke, still held her as if through love alone she could return to her daughter the pieces of sky fate had stolen. She once choked back tears and confessed, "I made millions of people smile, but I was powerless before my own child's smile." Jean Tierney's story became one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking tragedies. A reminder that sometimes a moment that seems harmless can shatter an entire future, and that a mother's pain once carved deep will never fade. And in another corner of Hollywood many years later, another star, Angie Dickinson, would also watch her daughter grow up in a limited world where every day was a challenge just to exist. Number 6. Angie Dickinson. Her daughter ended her life because the pain was too great. On January 4, 2007, Los Angeles lay under a cold, heavy fog at 2:00 a.m. The shrill ring of the phone sliced through the stillness. Just 3 words rasped out over the line were enough for Angie Dickinson to know her world had just collapsed. Her only daughter, Nikki Bacharach, would never come home again. Not because of an accident, nor a fatal illness, but because the storms in her mind had finally swept her away after 40 years of struggling to survive in a world too harsh for such a fragile soul. In the silent house, Angie sat motionless before a wall of photographs. The soft yellow light fell on a frame of a little blonde girl clutching a doll, eyes half closed from the sun, a smile unfinished. She whispered, her voice crumbling into pieces. "Why did you have to leave like this?" Memories pulled her back to 1966. When Nikki was just a few months old, Angie sensed her daughter was different from other children. She rarely smiled when held her gaze, often drifting into the distance, as if lost in a private world no one else could enter. The doctor's diagnosis only confirmed what a mother's heart had already known. Nikki had Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism spectrum disorder, along with poor eyesight. At the time, Asperger's was a vague concept. Beyond the medical challenges, Nikki faced suspicious glances and social exclusion. At the height of her career, Angie was willing to step away from major roles to stay by her daughter's side. She patiently taught her the smallest tasks, from tying shoelaces, recognizing colors, to speaking a full sentence. Each night, she read the same thin book over and over, hoping each word would be the fragile thread that pulled her child closer to the outside world. But 40 years passed, and though she grew older, Nikki lived within a closed circle with few friends, often sinking into depression. Burt Bacharach. Nikki's father once admitted on television she was smart, but the world was too loud and cruel for her. Angie took her from one clinic to another, from one specialist to the next, trying every therapy she heard of. But each time a glimmer of hope appeared, it quickly faded. And then that winter morning took everything away. When she heard Nikki was gone, Angie felt the sky cave in, leaving nothing to hold on to. Speaking to the press, she said, only one short sentence, but it carried a lifetime of heartbreak. "My child was never short of love. only of a world gentle enough for her to live in. From that moment on, her eyes always held a cold emptiness time could never fill. Nikki had taken a part of her mother with her forever, a part of her heart that would ache each day, knowing that love, no matter how boundless, is sometimes powerless against life's cruelty. Angie knew she wasn't the only one in Hollywood to experience such loss. Decades earlier, another famous father, Roy Rogers, the singing cowboy of America, had also cradled his daughter in his arms, but only for 2 short years before fate took her away.